In today's video, we're going to be looking at why we would use the if and the nested if formula, the syntax of the if and the nested if formula, and troubleshooting some common errors that people tend to run into when they're trying to use these within their Functional Skills ICT Level 2 exam. So before we even move into this, we need to look at what an if formula is and why we're going to use one in the first place. So an if formula checks the contents of a cell against criteria that you have set. If this criteria is met, you'll return a true statement and otherwise a false statement if it hasn't been met. An if formula can have as many logical tests or questions as you want to put into it, but for the level 2 ICT syllabus, the maximum you're going to need is 2. Now, to look at why we'd actually do this in the first place, let's look at like a realistic example with some data attached to it. So here we've got a set of fictional football boots, because if I use real ones, I'll probably get sued, and we've got some data attached to each one. So here in our G column, we have got a formula that is checking whether or not we are going to restock a pair of boots. We're only going to restock a pair of boots if they are worth less than £70 per item, which is in our E column. So if we have a look down our data, anywhere that is £70 or more, at the minute say discontinue. And our formula for that looks like this. If we take out all the specificity of this formula and put it back to its base syntax or layout, it looks like this, and we can see how it matches up. So our first section is our logical test, and that is a question that we are putting in to the formula, the criteria that it's got to be met for our true statement to come up. In this case, we've only got space for one logical test, and that is a situation in which we would use a standard if formula when we're only testing the contents of one cell. So here in this case, we wanted it to be less than 70, so we can see my cell reference for my first cell, a less than symbol, and then 70 as our value. I've not put pound signs on because pound signs, slashes, percentage signs and things like that all get added by the Excel spreadsheet after the fact for your benefit. The spreadsheet itself only sees the information as raw digits and then formats it for you after. So if we put in pound signs, slashes and things like that, it'll all start to go a bit wrong. We have a comma to move between our sections, and when we move on in a second to looking at how we'd actually put this together ourselves, you'll see that the comma is like the breaker or the delimiter that separates each section. Our next section is our true statement, and this is what is going to come up if it is less than 70. So whatever we type within these speech marks is what the cell will say if the criteria is met. In this case, we've only got one word, but you can have spaces, punctuation, whatever you please within those speech marks, and that is what will be displayed. We've then got a comma to move on to our next section, and in this case our false will say discontinue. So we'd expect with this formula, any that is less than 70 to say restock, and any that is 70 or more to say discontinue. But let's have a go at putting this together and actually typing this out manually and see what it will look like when we're working within Microsoft Excel as we put our if formula together. So here we've got the example from the video earlier where we've got our fictional football boots and other data attached to it, wherein we're going to type in our formula to calculate whether or not we're going to restock a pair of boots. So we know we've only got one piece of criteria, is the individual price of the boot less than £70, so we know we're going to be using a one question if formula. When we start off our formula, so our equals if open bracket, we can see a little box pops up underneath where we are typing, and this is going to tell us the syntax of the formula and where all the individual sort of sections go. The bit in bold in this box is where we are now, and that tells us how we are progressing through the formula. So the first thing we need to calculate is our logical test, and that's going to be the question that we are asking. So we wanted to know if my price per item was less than 70. So we've used this particular symbol because we want the price per item to be less than 70, so the open end is touching the number 70 because that's what we want to be bigger. Once we've put our logical test in, we want to move on to our value if true. And we can see here that separating those two is our comma here. Our true and our false we can't quite copy because here it's put them in square brackets, but we never really use those in any of the formulas that we're going to be doing at level 2 functional skills, so we ignore those whenever we see them. We know that our true and our false is going to go in speech marks as we discussed earlier, so we're going to open a set of speech marks and type in whatever we want to come up if our price per item is less than £70, which in this case is going to be restock. Again, to get from my value if true to my value if false, my delimiter is this comma here. And we're going to open another set of speech marks and type in whatever I want to come up if the criteria isn't met, which in this case is going to be discontinue. So you can put anything in these speech marks, you can put punctuation, more than one word, it doesn't matter. As long as it's contained within the speech marks, that is what will come up if it's true or false. Once we finish the formula, we can close our bracket and press enter. And when we populate that down, we will see that we get the same results wherein there are 3 that say discontinue because these are the 3 that aren't less than £70. So if we've got a one question if, we use the basic if formula and we can see how that assembles as such. But in your exam you might also have to deal with having a two question if, also called an if and statement. So let's have a look at how we'd go about assembling one of those. So in our first example we looked at how we'd go about setting up an if formula to test one logical test or one piece of criteria. So we looked at is a pair of football boots worth less than £70 and giving a true or false statement based on that. But as we stated at the start of the video, the worst case scenario for your level 2 functional skills ICT exam is that we might have two separate pieces of criteria that we need to test. So at the minute, the if formula we've been using looks like this, where we've got room for one logical test and a true or a false statement depending on whether that criteria is met. In order to have room for our second piece of criteria, the first thing we need to decide is whether one or the other needs to be true, or whether both pieces of criteria need to be true. In the case of your level 2 functional skills ICT exam, it'll always be a case of them both needing to be true, and to do that we use an AND function. So you can see how after we've opened the first bracket, we've added in the AND function, and then opened a second set of brackets, and that allows us to include more than one logical test, as I've represented here with log 1 and log 2. That extra set of brackets and the AND included are the only difference between the two formulas, because once we've closed that second set of extra brackets and then put our comma in, it carries on as it did with our true and our false statements. So it is just the addition of that extra bit that allows us to include more than one logical test. So let's have a look at some data for where we'd use this in a sort of realistic example. So here we've got a list of people that have all played James Bond, because thinking of names is hard, and we've got some data attached to them. And we've used a formula to determine whether or not they qualify as a premium customer. So to be a premium customer, these people need to have made more than 5 orders and spent more than £250. So we can see how that is split between my C and my D columns. So when we're saying two separate pieces of criteria, that is the distinction that we are making.